Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar where we're going to be talking about strategic planning this morning. My name is Phil Herman. I'm a partner at the Impact Group, and we are so pleased to have joining us this morning Dr. Ed Michalik, who is the president and CEO of Threshold Rehabilitation Services. Welcome, Dr. Michalik.
Thank you. Nice to be with you, Phil.
Thanks for making time for us today. Today, we're going to be talking about strategic planning, but really looking at it from the perspective of Threshold. And so, Ed, would you mind telling us a little bit about Threshold Rehabilitation Services?
Sure. Threshold is one of the oldest human service agencies in Berks County, which is located in central eastern Pennsylvania, near Reading, Pennsylvania. We've been around since 1965. We have roughly 300 employees, 19 community homes for people with intellectual developmental disabilities, and another 3 for people with mental health issues. We also run a partial hospital program, peer support services, and a job seeking and supporting agency called Berks Personnel Network. And our annual budget is roughly $21 million.
Great, thank you. We've done sort of multiple versions of strategic plans for Threshold or work with you. You've worked closely with Tom Speaks on developing plans. I think one was more of a shorter term tactical plan, and one was about longer term sustainability. Let's take a step back even before that, and before we talk about those plans. When you contacted the Impact Group, why did you reach out to the Impact Group? What was the need?
Well, I think our former CEO, who had been here 48 years, believe it or not, I myself don't intend to be here 48 years. But our former CEO, Tom McNeilis, is a great guy who's well known in the community, worked his way up from really an internship, I believe. I think every organization needs a long-range plan. What I think the key thing is to make sure that when you look at it a year later, you don't have people say, why did we agree to that? Or, I don't know what that means. And having overseen most of the county's human services for roughly 22 years, and being kind of the regulator and the overseer of the system, seen a lot of long-range plans and a lot of plans that get done and they're put on the shelf. And we really wanted something to propel us into the future and to guide us, and something that we wanted to have from the top down and the bottom up. Really, everybody needed to know about it. So initially, we did a tactical plan because obviously, I think every organization, in my experience, has short-term challenges. Sometimes they can become threats, and I think you need to keep the lights on and the doors open. And so the first plan we turned to, since I've been here a little bit over 2 years, was the Impact Group, because of their reputation and our work with them before. And I find Tom and staff there at the Impact Group to be extremely knowledgeable, fleet on their feet, and able to change as we move along. So the first plan was a tactical plan, and it was a good one. I was initially hired about 2.5 years ago to be the chief operating officer. And at that point, looking at it with our former CEO, we both decided that at some point when I became the CEO, if I was lucky enough to do that, we would revisit it again. And we have. And we're right at the tail end, right in the process. We had one review with our board of directors and received their input. And now we're dusting off the finer edges and going to present it for final approval to the board in May. But we also needed a long-range plan. And one of the things that I don't think I've seen in any other agency, at least locally here, is they never took it down to the middle-level managers. And really, it's the middle-level managers that need to be all pulling in the same direction. To me, I find it as an executive, it's easy to have senior staff pulling in the same direction, but then it gets lost somewhere in the translation, and people don't feel like they own it. So we included our middle-level managers, and now what I'm starting to hear, we did this back in late fall, is middle-level managers saying, is this in line with our strategic plan, or this is in line with our strategic plan? And that excites me. Never thought something like that would, but it's nice to see people at that level who have accepted ownership, felt like they truly had input, and they did, because we made changes based on what they were telling us, and help senior management.
Sorry to interrupt you. Let's talk about that part, so specifically for a moment. We believe that strategic plans really need to be driven by community and stakeholder feedback, and they need to be actionable and hopefully measurable. So on the driven by community and stakeholder feedback, tell us about who you did involve in the development of the plan, and how Tom worked with you in doing that.
Well, part of it, I was not here for the strategic partners, but we reached out to those funding sources that are critical to our existence. Our county MHDD administrator, our managed care company that really pays for most of our Medicaid funded services, and other key people in the community, because we wanted to see what they thought of us. And we wanted to see where they thought our role is. And we found some gaps where some people thought we did X, which we did, but we did Y and Z too. And it's interesting how we were known in some pockets and not others for some of the services we deliver. And that's important when you're looking to drive referrals and funding. So it helped us, because what we did was eventually we hired a firm to do social media management, because we were all over the place. And frankly, I'm not a fan or extremely knowledgeable about social media, but that's where we're getting our staff from. And that's who pays attention. Even people of our generation, Phil, pay a lot more attention to social media than I do. And we needed to reach out to people in that medium and kind of funnel it through a process here where we had input, but we didn't have time to organize it. So the strategic plan, really tying it back to that, helped us to focus on who we needed to reach out to, who was our market for referrals, and who was our market for staff recruitment and retention. And the plan helped us to focus on that also.
How was your board involved or not involved in the development of the plan?
Well, they were very involved. They obviously had a thorough review of the and part of the stakeholder process of what they thought, because I think you can assume many things about board of directors. We have a very active board of directors their professions are from different walks of life. Some of them are retired, some of them aren't. And it was interesting to find out how who sat as our board of directors, what they thought. So they were a part of it, and they approved the tactical plan, as you and I refer to it as, and had a great deal of input into the almost ready for prime time plan that we're going to approve in May. And we would go back to them one more time after our senior staff look at some of the finer points. We recently hired a new CIO. Our first chief information officer was here 28 years and moved on to some better things for he and his family. So now we have a new CIO, and we wanted to make sure he had input, because he has a lot of broad experience in the provision of public services. So we're giving him the opportunity to take a look at, work with other members of our senior team, and then we will present that in May.
Great. So as we were talking about, a piece of developing a strategic plan is involving stakeholder or community feedback. You talked about some of the examples with some of your partners, the board of your board of directors as well. And organizations do that in many different ways in terms of the community and the stakeholder feedback. Some of it is through conversations, like with your board. Sometimes it's through interviews with key partners. Sometimes it's through surveys with a really broad scope of stakeholders. Did Threshold do any surveys as part of your development?
Yes, we did. The Impact Group was the one who ran the string through that.
Right. Who was your population there that you were surveying?
Well, we were looking across the population for those in the mental health community as well as in the intellectual developmental community. And also we provide employment services, so we need to talk to our employment partners. But what we also do is one of the things that I was tasked with is to increase our visibility and engage more with the community and all kinds of organizations that, quite frankly, years ago I would have never imagined that would be useful to do. But when your name is out there all over the place, you begin to hear input, sometimes from what I call unique places that you would have never thought of. But that's all part of the plan too. I mean, you need to do that and find out what people think of you, because that's important for fundraising and support for special activities. I mean, you can go wild with all of this stuff, and you really need to in order to have an effective plan. Because the worst thing that could happen to me and to us is for me to hear a year from now when we review the plan, because we intend to review it on a yearly basis. It's kind of like a 5-year plan, but you got to review it. You just can't keep it on the shelf and wake up one day and say, oh, it's been 3.5 years. Maybe I should look at this, and the dust flies off and hits you in the face. We need to look at it every year and see how are we making progress towards our future. Are we expanding in areas that we are strong in? I think one of the problems with many organizations is they go wild and go all over the place, and then they deviate from their central mission, and that's never a good thing. You have to focus on what you're good at, and of course take some chances. You don't want to be too safe, but you kind of need to stay in your lane, I think.
Yeah, and the other thing that we see sometimes, and you keep teeing me up for the next question with each of your comments, but a lot of times we see organizations that will create a strategic plan, and then the strategic plan has a lot of enthusiasm for a few months, and then it starts to sit on a shelf, and there are other priorities, and they're not really using the strategic plan to guide their work, just like you said, how do you prevent it from sitting on the shelf? So what are your plans for how you're going to keep the strategic plan in front of the leadership as well as your staff across the board? How do you keep it as a living, breathing document that is guiding your work? What are your plans for that?
Well, there's a couple things. Our first tactical plan is in poster form, plastered on the back of all of our doors. And that was not something that we said you have to do. I have seen people do it. And instinctively, I did it because every time I go out the door, it helps me look at, okay, well, oops, I didn't do anything this week or this month on that part of the plan. I had an idea, I need to do it. So then I go write it down and I do it. And I think that's important to do. So we have it plastered on the back of our doors as we walk out the door. The second thing is some staff has suggested we have a bi-weekly senior management meeting. And it's been recommended, I believe, by our Chief Human Resource Officer that we take a certain part of that, certain objectives and part of that, and just talk briefly about that at our senior management team meeting, which is every 2 weeks. So that every 2 weeks, we're jogging people's memory to see if what we're doing, some of the things that we're planning in those meetings are consistent with what we said we were going to do. It's not easy, but again, we don't want to wait a year or two from now and find out that we've gotten distracted. And you do get distracted. If you're real honest with yourself, there are issues that arise that threaten your funding. There are competitive issues with people who are in the same business as we are, and all that kind of stuff is kind of it's a speed bump that you hit, and it's like, wow, and then you go and you deal with that. And I think a lot of organizations find themselves in the same situation as we do, where we're like a squirrel gathering nuts. My neighborhood that I live in has huge squirrels, and they're all over the place. And I love to watch them. It's kind of relaxing, but they're like, okay, now I got to run here, and that's what we do. That's what we do in this business. Or you have consumer client emergencies, and that's what our focus is always, that we take care of the people we serve. Well, they're people. things happen, just like they happen to we and our families. They happen to the people we serve. So then you go running off in that direction to make sure that they're okay and the issues that arose are taken care of. So you have all kinds of distractions that if you're an active, vibrant organization, that's going to happen. So we have to figure out some way to slap ourselves in the head, so to speak, like, okay, let's get back to this. That crisis is over.
Well, I think that's a great point, that it is going to happen, and organizations that keep the strategic plan in front of them enables them to at least have a conversation about, is this incident, is this issue, is this challenge that's before us, does it require us to even modify our overall direction, or is it something that is a bump and we're getting back to our overall direction once we get to the other side of it? But if there's not a process in place to periodically put the plan in front of the leaders and your mid-level leaders and have conversations about what is happening, then it's easy for the work to be dominated by the emergencies and the different nuts that we're going to grab, right? So there's a tremendous power in when we talk with clients about a strategic plan being a living, breathing document. It would be just as bad to blindly follow a strategic plan straight forward for the next 3 to 5 years without ever looking at what's changing around you. So the strategic plan should be a guide, and it should also prompt conversations of should we be changing our priorities, or does it align with our priorities? Do we need to adjust or tweak the plan as we continue to move forward?
I think what we and I view, quite honestly, Phil, is that it has to be, and you touched on this, your strategic plan has to be a living, breathing document, because if you just narrowly focus on it, you could follow your strategic plan successfully and be out of business because you need to deal with an emerging thing. So the operation could be successful, and unfortunately the patient passes away. And that's the same thing with a strategic plan. It must be living, breathing. You have to look at it. One of my colleagues said to me, you can't be too serious, but then you can't be serious enough about your long-range planning document, because you can get distracted, go off, and then completely lose your way. Or you can be so rigid you fail to make adjustments as you go along because of the threats or issues that arise. So you got to find a place in the middle with a strategic plan, I believe.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly there. As you've gone through this process, what have you found to be most valuable?
Well, people's input, actually. You operate with a certain set of certain viewpoint every day, and then you run into someone on the street, a business leader, which I'm very involved with the business community, unrelated to human services, but you run into them and they'll give you an impression of something and you'll go, I never thought of that, or wow, you really think that about our organization. That's great. How can we become more engaged? And somebody contacted me just yesterday about providing support for a proposal. And one of the things we do is in Pennsylvania, we have photo license centers, and we provide the picture takers for 9 of those centers in Pennsylvania. And people don't know that, but they're our employees. And we have a contract with the Commonwealth and the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. So when we're talking to people, yesterday I was asked to provide support for a grant that a local railroad is applying for to renovate a coach car to be completely ADA accessible. And I now have a lead for a place for our folks to be employed. And that's really important because we've been a leader and innovator in providing employment for people with disabilities. And you never know when you take a phone call. Sometimes my staff will say, you're always out all over the place in the evenings. What are you doing out there? I said, I'm talking to people because I want to find, is there some way we can play in their sandbox? Because I think also if you stay just focused in what you do and isolated, and you don't interact with the business community, you can miss some tremendous opportunities to be innovative. And I think that's important to do. You can't just stay focused on exactly what you do all day. You got to be out in the community and looking for other opportunities. And that's where the strategic plan comes in. That has to be part of the plan, that that's what you're going to do, because otherwise somebody will say, well, that's not directly related to what we do. Well, I think everything's related to what we do. If we really truly want to encourage and support the integration of people with disabilities into our communities, we must mentor that, and we must, by example, lead and be integrated into our communities, even for stuff that doesn't, at least face value, make any sense.
I think that's a great point. And it gets back to that community and stakeholder feedback in terms of driving the creation of the plan at the beginning. It's such a, we've touched on it multiple times in this conversation. It's an essential piece of launching into that strategic planning process. And then once those goals and objectives are determined, keeping them in front of you as far as it being a living, breathing document. Let me ask you this. What advice do you have for leaders who are considering a strategic plan, who are thinking about getting into the strategic plan process?
Well, I would recommend the impact group, of course, because we've had an excellent experience with you. But whether you use the impact group or not, and I'm not paid to say that, but I would engage it with a very open mind. And the one thing that we have loved about our long-range planning process is we have a plan of how we were going to engage in it, and then we changed the plan because we wanted to make it specific to our organization. In other words, there was a template to start that Tom Speaks helped us with, but then he was very flexible, and our staff saying, no, I want to take it that direction. You have to allow your staff and your stakeholders to drive it. And of course, as a CEO, you want to be in charge of everything and in control of everything. At least I do. I'll admit that. But you have to kind of take a back seat and go sit in the passenger seat, and for a while, go on a wild ride and let the strategic planning process take you and be driven and guided by the people you're listening to and by the people who work for you and with you. And our board, as part of our bylaws, requires that a program participant, service recipient, participate in our board. And I really enjoy input from that individual because he's very much in touch with the community. The community loves him. He really gives us a perspective that I would never have. And I enjoy when he stops by my office to say, by the way, our strategic plan, I want to talk about something because I was thinking about this the other day. And you have to let people guide you and drive you. And sometimes that can be a little scary, or it's like, where the heck are we going today? But I think that's important to do. Flexibility and an open mind and a willingness to let other people drive the car for you for a while is important.
I think that's a really, really well said, and I appreciate your kind words. But whether it's Impact Group or any other organization, the importance of those partners coming together and being flexible with the process and listening to one another about what the organization needs in a strategic plan, because ultimately each organization, school district, entity that we work with, there's similarities, but they're their own, and they have their own sets of history, their own priorities amongst their stakeholders, and it's important that all of these processes have some basic similarities, but they're tailored to the individual organization and their circumstances at the time, and so understanding that is an important piece, and the willingness to be flexible, both from a partner that might be helping with the strategic plan as well as the organization itself. I think that flexibility is essential. Yeah.
Well, the one other thing I thought of too is you have to be open to criticism, and we all would like constructive criticism, but But that's the other scary thing. You never know what people are going to say when you let them say it. And you would like your staff to all say wonderful things, but that's not practical or realistic because they see things from a different perspective. And I meet with all of our new employees. We have orientation every 2 weeks because we're always hiring, like most providers our size. And I have a certain time and my predecessor did this also. He taught me that we meet with, the CEO meets with all new employees and you hear some incredible things. And during that time, I encourage them to always visit anytime they have an issue. We keep an open door policy because they tell you some great things on how to be more efficient and do a good job with what you do. And you got to be open to that. And sometimes you hear things you don't want to hear, but that's life.
Right. It takes a little bit of courage to be vulnerable, right? I mean, courage to be vulnerable with if you're going to step into this process. Ed, thank you so much for taking your time today to help tell your story. We are very grateful for it. I've enjoyed the conversation and hearing your story today. To those tuning in, thank you for joining this webinar. If you have any questions for us, or I'm sure you can look up Dr. Michalik on Threshold Rehabilitation Services website. They could probably find your contact information there. And do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. Again, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
You too.